The trail starts in shade. Within a few paces, the noise of the road is gone and the canopy closes overhead, maple and basswood standing straight and close, the light coming down green and thin. This is a small park by the numbers, a little over 370 acres on the edge of a Minnesota suburb. But the ground under these trees was shaped by a glacier, farmed by homesteaders, and lived on by the Dakota long before either. Every one of those stories is still here, if you know where to look. We are at Spring Lake Regional Park in Prior Lake, Scott County, Minnesota, about 20 miles southwest of Minneapolis. The park wraps the north shore of Spring Lake, roughly 600 acres of water sitting in a chain with Upper and Lower Prior Lake. It is run jointly by Scott County and the Three Rivers Park District, with about 4.5 miles of hiking trail. Worth saying clearly, because there is another Spring Lake Park Reserve out on the Mississippi in Dakota County. Different place. This one is here. To understand this ground, you have to start with ice. During the last glaciation, the Laurentide ice sheet pushed south into what is now Minnesota in a series of lobes, great tongues of ice moving on their own schedules. The last one to cross this part of the state was the Des Moines Lobe. Around 14,000 years ago, it reached from the Red River lowland in the northwest all the way south to what is now Des Moines, Iowa. Everything you are about to walk over was underneath it. Notice how the ground refuses to be flat. The trail climbs a low rise, drops into a hollow, climbs again. That is not erosion. Erosion smooths a landscape over time. This is the raw shape of what a glacier dumps when it dies, a jumble of clay and sand and gravel and boulders let down out of melting ice with no sorting and no plan. Geologists call it till. It is the reason the soil here is heavy, and the reason the hills wander instead of running in ridges. When a lobe stops advancing, it does not retreat like a curtain. It stagnates. Huge blocks of ice get buried under sediment washed off the melting front, and they sit there, insulated, sometimes for centuries. Then they finally melt, and the ground above them collapses into the hole. What you get is a depression with no river running into it and no river running out. Fill that with rain and snowmelt and groundwater, and you have a lake. Minnesota is stitched with thousands of them. Spring Lake sits in a basin like that, part of a long depression running through this country that also holds Upper and Lower Prior Lake. Local accounts describe an ancient valley here, deepened and then largely filled by the ice, with the lake settling into what was left. The lake reaches about 37 feet at its deepest. The slope we are walking is the rim of that hollow, and it has been dropping toward the water for something like 14,000 years. A few miles north of us is a valley far too big for the river inside it. That is the Minnesota River Valley, and it was not cut by the Minnesota River. It was cut by Glacial River Warren, the outlet of Lake Agassiz, an inland sea of meltwater larger than all the modern Great Lakes combined. That torrent carved a trench up to 5 miles wide and 250 feet deep. Then Agassiz found another outlet and the river simply stopped. So this park sits on the upland shoulder above that abandoned trench. Everything drains toward it eventually. That geography is not academic. It is the reason there were bluffs and river bottoms and lakes and woods all within a day of each other, which is exactly the kind of country that supports people well. The land under our feet was, for a very long time, a good place to live. It still is. The traffic has just changed. This forest has a name. French explorers called it the Grand Bois, the Big Woods, and the English name stuck. It was a hardwood forest that once covered roughly 5,000 square miles of south-central Minnesota in a diagonal band about 100 miles long and 40 miles wide. Elm, basswood, sugar maple, and red oak, growing tall and dense enough that in high summer the canopy nearly shut out the sun. Ecologists still classify this park as Big Woods, Southern Mesic Maple Basswood Forest. Look at the trunks. Straight, gray, competing hard for light with almost no branching until far up. That is what a closed canopy does. Sugar maple can germinate and survive in deep shade, which is why it inherits a forest like this, and basswood sprouts back from its own stump in a cluster. Underneath there is ironwood and green ash and aspen. The floor is thin and brown and quiet. In spring, before the leaves close over, this same floor goes white and yellow with ephemeral wildflowers for a few short weeks. The Big Woods is younger than it looks. The prevailing theory is that this forest assembled only about 300 to 600 years ago, during a cooler, wetter stretch, and that it survived because of fire breaks. Prairie fire, some of it from lightning and much of it set deliberately by indigenous people to manage game and grassland, kept trees out of the open country to the west. Lakes, rivers, and broken ground stopped those fires at the wood's edge. The line between prairie and forest was drawn by flame and by people. That makes this an edge, and edges are rich. Within a short walk you can move from deep shade to marsh to open water, and historically to oak savanna and prairie beyond. Different foods, different medicines, different animals, all within reach. Which brings us to the people who knew this ground first and who are still here, because the Big Woods was never empty. It was a homeland with a name. This is Dakota land. Specifically, it is the country of the Mdewakanton, whose villages stood along the lower Minnesota River, a short distance north of where we are walking. Mdewakanton in the Dakota language means dwellers of the Spirit Lake. The name of the lake beside Prior Lake was not always Prior. The Dakota called it Bde Maya though, which is recorded as meaning Lake of the Blue Banks. That name is older than the county, older than the state, older than the treaty that took it. The Dakota did not simply pass through this country. They lived in it across the whole year, moving with what the land offered. Sugar maple in early spring, exactly the trees around us now. Fishing and gardens in summer near the lakes. Wild rice in the wetlands in late summer. Deer in the woods in autumn and winter. A landscape with this many edges made that possible. The maples we are walking under are not scenery. They were a food supply. Wild rice grows in shallow, slow water, and the marshes of this watershed held it. It is a grain harvested from a canoe, one stalk bent at a time, and it will still be growing in Minnesota this autumn. This is worth saying carefully. The Dakota are not a historical footnote in this story. They are a present tense people with a government, a language program, and a stake in this land today, roughly 3 miles from this trail. The community nearby carries the name of a line of leaders. Sakpe, which means 6 in Dakota, was the name given to a leader whose wife bore sextuplets, and it passed down through his successors as spokesmen for their village on the Minnesota River. The town of Shakopee, a few miles from here, carries that name in an anglicized spelling. So does the Shakopee Mdewakanton Sioux community. It is one of the few places on this map where the older name won. The first Europeans through this country were not farmers. They were traders, moving furs down the rivers, and they came for well over a century before anyone tried to own the ground. Trade brought metal, cloth, guns, and debt into a system that had not carried debt before. And debt, it turns out, is the lever. When the treaties came, the money owed to traders was written into them, and much of what was supposedly paid for this land never reached the people who signed. The paperwork arrived quickly. Scott County was created by an act of the territorial legislature on the 5th of March, 1853, and named for General Winfield Scott, a soldier of the War of 1812 and the Mexican War who, as far as the record shows, never set foot here. A line on a map, a general who never came, and a name that outlasted everything. That is roughly how this half of the continent was administered. On the 5th of August, 1851, at Mendota, within sight of Fort Snelling, the Mdewakanton and Wapikute Dakota signed a treaty with the United States. Together with the Traverse des Sioux Treaty signed weeks earlier, it transferred roughly 24 million acres in what is now Minnesota, South Dakota, and Iowa. In return, the Dakota were to receive payment and a narrow reservation, a strip along the Minnesota River. The ground we are standing on passed out of Dakota hands in that summer. It is easy to say a treaty was signed and move on. It is harder to sit with what it did. 24 million acres. The reservation left behind was a band about 150 miles long and 20 miles wide, and even that was cut in half a few years later. The annuity payments the Dakota were promised arrived late, or short, or not at all. People who had fed themselves for generations were made dependent on a warehouse and a clerk. In 1862, with the payments overdue and food withheld, the Dakota went to war for their homeland. The war lasted about 6 weeks and it ended badly for everyone. In the aftermath, the United States voided its treaties with the Dakota, and in the winter of 1862 and 63, roughly 1,600 Dakota people, most of whom had taken no part in the fighting, were interned in a camp below Fort Snelling. Estimates suggest between 130 and 300 of them died there. On the 3rd of March, 1863, Congress passed an act banishing the Dakota bands from the state of Minnesota. Not a battle, not a treaty, an act of Congress. The people whose homeland this was were legally removed from it. That is not ancient history. If you were standing on this trail in 1863, you were standing on land that had just been emptied of its people by statute, and the stumps of the big woods were already going down around you. But a small number of Mdewakanton never left or found their way back. Through the 1880s, Congress appropriated money to buy land for them, and by acts in 1886 and the years that followed, communities were reestablished. Those purchases included parcels right here in the Prior Lake area. It was a fraction of what had been taken. It was also the thread that did not break, and everything that follows for the Shakopee Mdewakanton Sioux community runs back through it. The Shakopee Mdewakanton Sioux community gained federal recognition as a tribe in 1969. It opened a bingo hall in 1982 and Mystic Lake Casino Hotel in 1992, and turned that revenue into one of the more consequential native economies in the country. It has restored more than 1,000 acres of prairie in the last 2 decades. In late 2023, it brought bison back to its land, a small herd from the Sisset and Wapet and Oye. Not a memory. A neighbor. Meanwhile, the ground we are on took a different path. In 1871, the Chicago, Milwaukee, and St. Paul Railroad pushed a line through here, and the lake beside the tracks acquired the name of a railroad superintendent named Charles H. Pryor. A store went up the same year. A post office followed in 1872. The village was platted in 1875, and Prior Lake was incorporated on the 11th of February, 1891. A man who managed a division of track, and now a city carries his name. And then something unexpected happened to these lakes. The railroad that named them also delivered people to them. In 1879, the Grainwood House opened on the water with 150 rooms and cottages, a genuine resort destination for city people escaping the summer. It burned in 1894, was rebuilt, and burned again in 1930. By the 1950s, there were 19 resorts operating on Spring and Prior Lakes. This quiet shoreline was, for a while, a holiday coast. The rest of the big woods went to the axe. From the 1850s, the state sold land to immigrants and to Americans moving west, and they did what they had come to do. Elm and maple and basswood came down. Stumps were pulled. Fields were opened. Today, only about 1% of the original big woods survives anywhere, scattered in parks and preserves. That is the arithmetic of this landscape. 99 parts field and town, 1 part forest, and we are walking in the 1 part. The land inside this park boundary was farmland. It was bought and sold and merged and split and passed between families for a century. Along the southern edge, where the ground runs down to Spring Lake, the Greenwood family held property for decades. That whole restless shuffling of property lines finally stopped in the late 1960s, when Scott County bought the ground that would become Spring Lake Regional Park. The fields stopped being fields. The woods began slowly to come back. There is one exception worth naming. A man named Fred Arndt owned land inside what is now the park. He was not really a farmer. He was the postmaster and general store manager for Prior Lake through the 1920s, 30s, and 40s, and for whatever reason he chose not to clear the oaks on his ground. He let them stand. Those oaks are still there. They are the reference for the oak forest restoration happening in this park right now. One man declining to cut, and a century later it matters. So the woods around us are full of quiet evidence. Rotting fence posts, deliberately left standing by the forest managers. Scattered bottles, old tires, and abandoned deer stand. A concrete foundation about 20 feet across from a 1930s farm building, now under moss. An underground cistern, maybe 3 feet wide and 3 feet deep, with pipes still poking out of the ground. A cabin stood southeast of this park by 1854. The forest has closed over all of it patiently. It is a strange feeling to stand next to a farmhouse foundation with 60-foot trees growing through what used to be a yard. The 1930s are not long ago. Somebody kept a cistern full, walked out a door, looked at an open field where we now cannot see 30 feet for the leaves. Forests are not permanent and neither are farms. The ground simply hosts whatever is winning at the moment, and right now the trees are winning. This park is not only forest. Inside its boundary there is old maple basswood woodland, open water wetland, cattail marsh, and a tamarack bog, which is a genuinely strange thing to find in a suburb. Tamarack is a conifer that drops its needles every autumn, going gold and then bare, and it grows in acidic, waterlogged peat where almost nothing else will. A bog like that is a fragment of a colder world that never quite left. The lake below us is managed primarily for walleye and holds largemouth bass, northern pike, crappie, bluegill, and perch. Eurasian watermilfoil is in there too, an invader that arrived the way invaders usually do, on a boat. Along the shore and the marsh, birders have logged species of real conservation concern here, including the horned grebe, which is listed as endangered in Minnesota. A small park and a bird with nowhere much left to go. None of this maintains itself. The understory of a woods like this is under constant pressure from buckthorn, a shrub brought over as a hedge plant that now shades out everything native beneath it. Crews here cut and treat it and plant pollinator ground in its place. The county has been adding trails, an accessible fishing pier, a kayak launch. This is what a park in the 21st century actually is. Not preserved, tended, argued over, repaired. We are coming back toward the trailhead now, and it is worth adding up what we walked over. Ice 14,000 years old, a river that carved a valley and then vanished, a forest that assembled itself a few centuries ago behind a wall of fire, a homeland, a treaty, an exile, and a return. A railroad, a resort, 100 years of farms. And then somebody decided this 370 acres should just be left to grow. That decision is the whole point. Nobody would call Spring Lake Regional Park a wilderness. It has a dog park and a parking lot and a paved trail, and the road is a few minutes away in any direction. But it is 1% of the big woods. It is glacial ground that was never scraped flat. It is a lake that has been here since the ice. Small places carry big histories, and this one carries an enormous amount for its size. So walk it slowly if you come. Look at the shape of the ground and think about buried ice. Look at the oaks and think about a postmaster who chose not to cut them. Look at the water and remember it had another name first, and that the people who gave it that name are still here, 3 miles up the road, running a language program and a bison herd. Thank you for watching. Follow for more trails of the world.